Hello, everyone. I love it. I now have a little talk track introducing me. I feel very fancy. Well, I am so pleased to introduce our next presentation, a wonderful panel all about the intersection of XR and AI. Oh, testing, there we are. So a theme of today, as you probably noticed, has been this really exciting intersection of XR and AI. We heard from Ori that XR is the interface for AI. However, there'll be some challenges as well ahead of us, such as biases in algorithms that may perpetuate things like harmful stereotypes, manipulated content leading to misinformation, all these sorts of things that we'll have to watch out for. But luckily, our expert panel will be addressing all of these topics, led by moderator Amy Lameyer, who's a wonderful leader for women in XR, obviously a topic very near and dear to my heart. Her WRX Funds portfolio is comprised of all female founders in the XR, VR, and AR space, and 5 of whom are speaking today and tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming Amy and this wonderful panel. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. So nice to see you out there, although I don't know if other people have mentioned it, but it's amazingly bright. Looking forward to introducing the panelists today. First, we have Tony Parisi, a 25-plus year veteran in this space, now the Chief Product Officer at Lamina One. Alvin Graylin, GM and President of China for HTC. And last but not least, Kent Bai, who's recorded over 2,000 episodes of Voices in VR. And also, a fun fact for those that may not know, but he did a couple years of Voices of AI as well in 2016 and to 2018, or 2014 to 2016.
2018,
Yeah. So today, we are indeed talking about AI and the metaverse and what's next. So if you're looking for what's already happened, you can go somewhere else, because we're going to talk about the future. But it's a really, they're 2 hot topics that are being ever clumped together more and more these days. And I think we'll start off by every one of these people on stage could do 45 minutes themselves on a keynote on these topics. So you're really lucky to be here, to hear the nuggets of wisdom from all 3 of them, to hear the discussion that we're going to have. And there's lots of public content as well that if you want to dive in deeper. And so as you would hear in a Kent Bai podcast, let's dive right in. First of all, let's define the metaverse. That was the big topic last year. So we should do that just to make sure we're all aligned on what the definition is. I was going to go with Matthew Ball's definition, and then you've written principles on the metaverse. But earlier today, Roni said the spatial internet, and I thought, oh, that's a nice, easy way to define it. So I'm going to go with spatial internet, unless any of you want to add to that.
It's pithy.
No, that sounds good.
It's the spot, right?
Yeah, great.
It's simple. Yeah.
So we're going to move on to AI and how to define AI, and maybe a little bit of a history of AI as well, since that's a newer topic, at least for this particular conference. We've seen a lot of change in generative AI, particularly in the last 6 months. And it's AI is a broader technical set of anything from computer vision, natural language processing, machine learning. Ori says XR is the interface for AI, and Roni said AI is what XR has been waiting for. Do you agree with these statements, and what would you add to the definition of AI?
I mean, these are massive topics. These are massive problem domains. I could start with a pet peeve of mine, which is that I think a lot of people think that AI is the solution to all of our content creation and authoring problems in XR. And I would say that's a somewhat lazy way to think about it. And clearly, we're seeing a lot of generative AI assisting in authoring. But it's not the whole equation. I mean, you look at game engines, that's how most people have created XR for the last little while. But there's a whole slew of authoring techniques, capture tools, easy drag and drop, that folks have already forgotten about because AI has hit the scene now, and they're like, oh, we're just going to put some text into some magical thing and worlds are going to come out of it. Well, that's a piece of the whole equation. So I think we start there when we think about content creation, and AI is a good marriage. I don't know what our other panelists think about that, but it's not, you can't oversimplify it to say you're just going to speak some words and worlds are going to happen, right?
Yeah, not yet. Maybe in a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think XR actually will benefit greatly from AI. And there's this myth that, oh, AI is here, now XR is dead. That's completely the opposite. There will definitely be a lot of improvements and efficiencies from AI making content creation better, which I actually think right now is the biggest roadblock to XR adoption is the lack of quality content. Right? And I mean, and you saw in all the speeches this morning, there's so much hardware coming out. Things are getting thinner and lighter and cheaper and higher resolution. But we still, on the standalone platforms are hundreds of pieces of content. On the PC VR content, we're talking about thousands of pieces of content compared to your phone has millions of content. Right, so we need to be able to get to millions of pieces of XR content for that space to take off. So I think XR will definitely bring the cost trending towards zero. It won't be automatic, but it was definitely trending that way. So I think it will definitely be.
Well, and in fact, it powers capture technology and other things like photogrammetry anyway, right? I mean, so those techniques are actually AI, machine learning based anyway, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, what made the internet and apps work is because everybody with a phone or social networks work is everybody with a phone becomes a creator. Pretty soon, everybody with a phone and with an XR device will be a world creator, which I think will make the metaverse a lot more exciting.
Yeah, and for me, I see them more as like sibling technologies where they're co-evolving together. And if you look at the evolution in history of even like virtual reality, where originally you have the PC and it's tethered, but then you have the computer vision innovations and machine learning to do simultaneous location and mapping to be able to actually have the standalone VR headsets. And then at the same time, you have at SIGGRAPH 2017, the video was showing that they had these virtual environments where they were teaching a robot to be able to have these interactions, and then they had that same neural network that was deployed out to that actual robot. And if you look back into the history of how a lot of these deep learning algorithms were even developed, you go back into like these Atari simulations where you have a very empirical number and benchmarks that a lot of the AI were trained on these virtual worlds. So you have this back and forth between how VR is helping AI develop and AI is helping VR develop. And you have it both at the technological scale of just the hardware itself, but you have up into the stack into content creation. And as I go out and talk to a lot of artists and creators, right now AI is sort of still in the pre-production mode. Like there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been sort of shipped out to production. Although I think that's actually going to change at Tribeca this year, where there's going to be some deep learning kind of like entire film that's made with AI. But right now I see a lot of stuff that's not quite production ready, but I love all virtual. There's actually using WhisperNet, or the Whisper AI from OpenAI, to be able to do conversational interfaces so you can actually speak out into a virtual world, talk to a chatbot, and then have that send back to OpenAI and send back. And it feels like you're kind of chatting with ChatGPT, but you're doing a conversational interface, but you're immersed into these virtual worlds. So I expect to see a lot more of that type of like user interface and conversational interfaces with like the open source version of Whisper API, Whisper that's able to allow you to just open up these new vistas of interfaces in UX. So I think it's going to be all both the hardware and also the experiential dimension as well.
It feels like, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you reminded me of something else, because we talk a lot recently about generative AI and content creation, but I think it's important to understand that AI has actually been part of XR usage for a very long time, right? Including, you're talking about the SLAM and hand tracking, voice, voice interactions, full body tracking, scanning rooms. All of that is actually AI. We didn't really focus on it as much before, and pretty soon we're going to need AI. We're going to have AI going into these systems being used to power the NPCs. And so you go into a social world, and there could be thousands of people, and maybe 10% of them are real people, but 90% are probably in AI. So those are the kind of things that are going to change. So it's not just about creating the worlds; it's about all the interactions that it's going to enable or have enabled so far.
Yeah, It seems like things have been changing daily. We've been on a chat thread that's keeping ourselves up to date. But in particular, there was the news yesterday, and I want to dive into this a little bit. It was the statement on AI risk, and this was from the Center of AI Safety. And I'll read it for you, for those of you that may have missed it. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemic and nuclear war. So given that statement has been signed by Sam Altman and a lot of leaders in the technical space and government leaders in general, where do you stand on that statement? Tony.
Me first, really? Recently Jaron Lanier wrote a piece for The New Yorker, which I loved, because his main point in that, it's a great piece, he's actually pretty excited about the tech, I think, in general, is that we're mystifying AI. We're sort of unconsciously making it some other thing that gives it magical powers, when really it's technology that we're creating. And if we just acknowledge that and start demystifying it, we won't think of it as this other thing that's coming for us. So I absolutely agree with that.
That it's actually human-driven.
It's human-driven. We're making this, at least for now. I mean, maybe in a few years that might not be the case anymore. So, I mean, I think that's kind of the good news and bad news, because that means that really what we need to look at is people behind this and humans behind this. And so I'm a little bit in the camp of that piece that came out, only because really what we have is potentially unbridled avarice. No offense, because you're an investor, but unbridled avarice meets a low emotional intelligence tech founders. No offense, all of you tech founders. I'm one of you. And what could possibly go wrong? And we've seen the movie with social media. And there were many, you could make arguments that there were some actual existential threats with social media in the last few years that we're just coming to grips with. And we're like, oh yeah, we'll break it, then we'll fix it. Are we going to unleash some genie out of the bottle? Unintended consequences. I'm not worried about ChatGPT, Midjourney. I use them every day. What comes after that? What startup's getting funded right now that's going to be Skynet and destroy us all? So that's my paranoia. I'm also an old middle-aged man, so I may just not be able to keep up with this stuff, but that's how I feel about it.
Okay.
Somebody talk me down.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I kind of heard both sides from what you were saying. One side you were saying you're not worried about it, but the other side is that it's going to be existential risk. So which one is it?
Oh, I'm worried because it's people who are doing this.
Okay. So maybe I'm on a slightly different camp than you, actually, because I actually have been doing XR and AI research for 30-something years. And we are actually using more black box models now versus the more prescriptive or procedural models in the past. So we are not actually defining it. It is self-learning. And unfortunately, self-learning on stuff that humans made. And we've not been a really good example for how we treat each other and how we treat animals in the world and so forth. So if it learns from us and is trying to be more like us, I would be very worried. Right? Now, I would also say that we actually there's two kinds of risks that is going to be associated with AI right now. One is more the misuse of AI that is not that it becomes sentient and wants to kill everybody, but even existing AI can be misused by people and create real risk. Right? The other risk is that AI becomes super intelligent, much more than us, and then finds that we're either bad for society or it just wants to preserve itself, and then kills us. So I think the second risk is actually not as high, because so far there hasn't been any significant data that shows that when it becomes smarter, that it's going to become evil, right? Even though all the dystopian novels say so. But the fact that if we get something that will be 1,000 times smarter than us, and there's people behind it that will misuse it, that actually can be very dangerous, whether from manipulation or using it to set off some chain of bad events, right? So the post that came out yesterday, I think, has validity, and it's not just founders and investors that are in it. There's people like Bengio and Hinton who are the fathers of this space, who are actually, I think, pretty sanguine about the risk, right? For them to have put their name on it, it does say a lot about the potential real risk. So we do need to be conscious of it, but I don't think we need to panic.
Not nuclear level.
Well, I mean, it could, if it's not managed well, it could. Right.
All right.
Well, I take a little bit more of a skeptical take on some of these. Well, first of all, I think that we do need to have like proper responsible innovation techniques. We need to have things like the AI Act that's happening in the European Union to address some of the different harms and the tiers of harms. And so there's real mechanisms that are happening that are very important to be able to ensure that there's not undue harm that's being caused by some of these systems. The problem that I see is that the type of rhetoric that's being used by casting AIs as kind of super intelligence, turns AI into this god, and also it sort of overstates some of the different capabilities of what AI is able to actually do, and it ends up being this mechanism of using fear to promote AI in this kind of weird way. Brian Merchant and Justin Hendricks did a whole podcast on that. There's been a lot of AI ethicists who are been on the wings critiquing a lot of these things for many, many years. Timothy Gibru, and you have companies like Google that are just firing all these AI ethicists. You have Meta, who's eliminating all their responsible innovation team. They just fired a lot of their policy folks. And so you have the people that are supposed to be the checks and balances between the engineers who are trying to create and make something, and then the ethicists who are trying to say, are we doing this in an ethical fashion? Are we deploying this in a way that is responsible? And there's this kind of like, once a product has been set, there's an intent to have it out in the world. There's no red button for any of the ethicists to be able to push. A lot of that responsibility has been put onto the engineers. So the people who are making it are now at the same time have this dual, there's some two masters of whether or not they're going to meet their deadline to ship it and whether or not it's going to be ethical. And you can't have one person do that. It needs a dialectical process with all these people that are coming in to do that, and all those people just got fired. Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of these deeper issues that are kind of like, yeah. So there's a way in which that if you search on Twitter for like hashtag AI hype, Emily Bender, you have folks like Ryan Kalo, you have Jan LeCun, who's in charge of AI research at Meta. All this stuff is sort of overstating that we're so far away from the cognitive architectures that are going to actually have like superhuman level intelligence of AI. And a lot of it is this kind of like autoregressive large language models, which is really what has been called by a lot of these AI ethicists as these stochastic parrots. So it's just kind of like mindlessly repeating these statistics, and we see it and we think it has more intelligence than it actually does. Yeah. It doesn't understand the language, it has no sense-making, common sense reasoning, it has no planning, and it's a lot dumber than it is, and it actually has all these gaps into the different harms that are done when we deploy these systems out in the world for people who aren't able to interface with it, or the documentary coded bias goes into like facial recognition as an example, where people who are black don't always get their face properly recognized. Right. And when it comes to cops using these artificial intelligence systems to automatically identify people, and when it goes wrong and they go to jail, then that's the type of level that the European Union is saying we need to just outright ban these levels. Yeah. So I think the EU and their legislation with these tiered models is a great approach. And I feel like the EU is like 5 to 10 years ahead of this conversation, and they've been looking at it for a long time. And I feel like we're here in the United States reinventing the wheel, thinking that we're going to have these sort of AI ethics statements going to be a solution to any of this. Yeah.
Okay, first off, if we're going to rely on US regulators, good luck. But what's really disturbing me is hearing that those jobs, those people are being let go at those larger companies doing this, because remember that dinner we had at South by Southwest? We were talking about this a lot at dinner. We need more humanities, we need more ethicists, we need more guided development from inside the industry. We can't expect government to regulate this. They can barely keep up with technology that's going on, right? Yeah, so it's very disturbing to hear that these companies are letting them go.
I think right now there is a intent to do regulatory capture by the big companies, because they keep saying, oh, this is really dangerous and we're going to help you manage it. But if they're the ones helping set the rules that will manage themselves, and it's only the biggest guys that are part on that table, it actually will reduce, first of all, it's a way to reduce competition from any smaller labs. But the second thing is when you're setting your own rules to manage yourself, that's actually kind of a formula for something bad to happen.
What are we seeing in China in terms of regulation?
Yeah, so about a month ago, China just came out with a new set of regulation that I thought was actually pretty comprehensive. Everything from defining that everything that's released by generative AI has to be watermarked, so it has to be noted. There must be a clear I guess, origin of information, of where everything came from. The people who release the models are responsible for ensuring the quality of it, and if anything's wrong, they have to fix it within a certain amount of time. So I mean, there's, and even the users have to have some level of responsibility if they misuse it, that they will be consequences for misuse, right? So I felt like they've actually done a pretty good job that the U.S. could follow as a way, because I know usually people, say, oh, whatever China's doing is bad and wrong and oppressive. But in this case, I actually think that the way that they've approached it is fairly methodical.
And so we were talking about this a little bit earlier too. Like, who do we think bears the responsibility if something goes wrong in this space? I think we're saying a lot could go wrong. It's human-driven ultimately, even though it's machines. But where does the responsibility lie in terms of something goes wrong?
I mean, according to at least these kind of proposals right now, and even in the U.S. proposals that are recently coming out, the makers of the models should take some level of responsibility, and I think they have to. Otherwise, what's happening today with this race condition, where Google releases something, then OpenAI has to release something faster, and then they have to integrate more, and everybody is just racing to get to that finish line, which we don't know if it's a good finish line.
Yeah, I'm wondering if as we see this technology change and as we see regulation or guidelines be developed, like, will that really protect consumers? Because ultimately, those are the people that we need to protect. And are you seeing that?
Like I had a couple of interviews. So there was a Stanford Cyber Policy Center. They had a whole existing law and extended reality symposium that was at the beginning of the year. And I was seeing who was had a beat on not only things like biometric data, because that's a whole other aspect of this intersection between XR and AI, is all the ways that the data that we're radiating off our body is going to be used to psychographically profile us. And so, and since did that talk, Nita Farahani came out with her book, Battle for the Brain, which goes into all these details for ways that we need to advocate for new human rights for cognitive liberty that protects our aspects of self-determination, our freedom of thought, and our mental privacy. So each of these different fundamental human rights has to be defined at an international law level, and then from there, that needs to ripple out into changing definitions of biometric data and GDPR. That's one example of how once that things get set at the international legal level, then they filter out into all these existing regulations. And so, in some extent, there's the privacy aspect of it, and then there's the other aspect, which is the deploying these AI systems and large language models out at scale, and what type of harm comes from doing that. And so that's where I think the AI Act is really trying to take a tiered approach, where you have the stuff that is so dangerous that you should just outright ban it, and they have a number of those different types of applications. And then you have the high risk, which is things that they are then obligated to report to the European Union on what are the different ways that you're making sure that this is safe. And then there's the other at the low risk, which is more of you need to disclose to the user that you're using AI. So an example of if you're talking to a chatbot, you answer the phone, there's going to be a requirement that you're actually either talking to a human or not. And if you're not talking to a human, it needs to disclose that you're actually interacting with an AI, an interactive agent at that point. And so the European Union, like I said, is at the forefront of that. And they're probably 5 to 10 years ahead of what the United States is in thinking about this. And so I would look to see what they're doing, because that is going to, just like GDPR, help to shape the architectures of privacy in these big companies that they had to, if they wanted to do business in Europe, they're going to have to change and build their systems to be able to oblige by these laws. Yeah. So anybody that is trying to create these metaverse applications that are international and global, then you're going to have to address the hardest legislation first. And then hopefully we'll have some of those protections that are happening in the European Union in 5 to 10, 20 years, or maybe at some point, come to the United States.
At least there's a guiding light. I'd like to talk about creators a little bit, shift the topic. And before going there, maybe giving a quick shout out to the XR Guild, speaking of ethics and privacy and biotech. Yay, nice. And yeah, for those of you that don't know about the XR Guild, you can go to xrguild.org. And also there's a group that from there that's meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. But it's a way to get involved, whether you're a creator or a builder or an advocate. There's a set of principles that are making sure that we're building a solid metaverse and set of technologies that's safe for everybody. But on the creator side, I want to jump in there a little bit because we're talking about AI and we're talking about the metaverse and what's next. And on the way in today, I was listening to Kent, your most recent Voices of VR, which everyone should listen to. It's my favorite episode ever, and I've listened to a lot. It's on the Fatboy Slim Engage VR experience that came out a couple months ago. But I was thinking about it because as part of that interview, you said, you asked how long it took, and they said it took a year or like a year and a half to create this 45-minute piece, which is like amazing. And again, one of the most fun music experiences I've done in VR, but that's a long time. So my question to all of you is, will AI help us create in the metaverse faster, better? Like what is that intersection of AI and the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of briefly talked about it earlier, but essentially you can now speak environments into place. You can describe, and you have a text, create a picture, then that picture becomes a 3D model. That 3D model, then you place into the world. So the workflow is definitely going to get faster, and the quality of content that's going to be created by less experienced developers will get better. In fact, I was talking to some developers recently who've been able to get 2 to 3x increase in efficiency. Reduced their artists, which may not be a good thing, but they've reduced their artist count and still able to maintain quality of production. So that's definitely going to happen. And it's going to be even more automated going forward because every day, like you're saying, there's a new release of something that now automates that process even more. I think the NVIDIA just released, in their presentation, kind of what's possible, and it's going to get to that place where what was described by Ori this morning, where you stick a book in and you get something out. I mean, we're a few years from that, but I think we will get there. And,
so you're saying it's going to get faster, it's going to get better, and we're going to replace create. We won't need as many builders.
I think we'll still need senior creators, senior designers, but you're going to need less and less of the junior people.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I just watched the finale of Succession, and I just want to give a shout out to writers and storytellers because I don't think AI is going to ever, I think the differentiating factor as we move forward is going to be storytelling. And so that's a big reason why I cover things like the Sundance New Frontier and South by Southwest and Tribeca and Venice Immersive and IFA Doc Lab, because that's where I see the frontiers of artists. And so I always, like Shari Frilo says, she always listens to the artists and what the artists are doing. So what are the artists doing? Well, there was Whipped Cream. They're using AI to do concept art and then do the concept art, and then they actually have the artists go out and actually make it. Or you have, there's a couple pieces at Laval Virtual that were using ChatGPT to do chatbot. And so in one of the experiences, it was said that when you go into a virtual world, you have this place where if there's nobody there, you need to have kind of like something to start it. So if there's someone there chatting with the chatbot, maybe that'll then help gather people so that once you get enough critical mass of people, then you stop talking to AI and you talk to each other. But there you have this problem where you have these empty rooms, and that may be a way of using AI to sort of kickstart some of these different social dynamics. And so for me, when you said that, Alvin, that we are going to have a world where we go in with 90% chatbots, I thought, oh my God, that sounds like hell, because it's going to be really, unless it's a really well-designed characters that you feel like you're actually pushing forward a story and there's a kind of a Westworld-esque, you feel like you're in a coherent narrative. But as of right now, the AIs aren't able to produce that type of coherent narrative. So I'm seeing more of immersive theater actors that have actual live actors doing stuff that AI can never do. And so there's this element of the liveness of alive, of things that are always going to preserve for that reactivity and being able to adjust to those dynamic interactions that are going to be difficult for AI to ever replace. So I feel like there's going to be, the storytellers that I see that are kind of pushing using the technology, but also finding the limitations of what that technology can't do yet.
So a skilled creator using the technology to do things at a different level.
We don't want to limit ourselves to what it is today or what it is in the next 6 months. But if you look at the trajectory of change and the level of realism you can get to, And honestly, for most of the people you're talking to are the senior designers and creators, right? If you went and talked to the people who are doing graphics design for some art shop, they're going to have a tough time keeping their job, right? But for the really creative people, which are the most one that you're going to interview, they're going to be hard to be replaced by AI. So we don't want to, I guess, extrapolate that, for all creators, they're going to be safe, right?
Yeah, and can I jump in with the writer analogy here? Because yeah, I mean it's a very timely conversation with what's going on with the writer's strike right now, and this conversation of the writers' room shrinking, right? I think by analogy, what Alvin was saying about visual artists, I think we're going to see the same thing with screenwriters too. I think the more senior ones will be just fine, if you will. The writers' rooms will get smaller though, because of these same factors that you can now use AI as a creative tool. To help with a lot of this sort of drudgery or just sort of like, let's do the ideation, let's do the concept phase with something like a chat GPT. Can I tell my story?
Yes.
It's a good time for this. So I also make music, and I'm doing music NFTs, and I'm hanging out with all these wonderful Web3 musicians. And one of these artists, a woman named Emma Miller, is a Scots singer-songwriter, was doing a Twitter space. The actual metaverse where we all hang out with is like Twitter spaces and Discords all day. And she was talking about the Scoby she was growing. Do people in the audience know what a Scoby is? Who knows?
Kombucha.
Okay, like 5%. It's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast that you put into sweet tea, and out comes kombucha. Eventually, it helps it ferment. And most of us in this Twitter space are like, Emma, what the hell is a Scoby? And she described it, and I looked at the picture on Wikipedia, and I was horrified. And I said, I'll be right back. And this is while the Twitter space was going on. And I went to ChatGPT, and I asked it to write me a 15-minute scene in final draft format about a Scoby that grows out of control and threatens a neighborhood. And it spat back this scene to me that was absolutely hilarious. Bizarrely, the protagonist was named Emma. I did not put that in the prompt. I don't know what's going on there. And I shared this with this Twitter space. That turned into a week-long series of Twitter spaces where a bunch of us got together and did table reads of an entire horror film franchise of Scoby movies that went 5 main episodes, a fan fiction handwritten one, a spin-out episode for one of the characters, and then a franchise reboot with the Scoby mated with jellyfish and took to the seas and took over the world. All because we were farting around in ChatGPT. But it led to this super creative, interactive theater, wonderful art experience, just as a lark. So
we talk about junior and senior.
I don't completely hate IR. I'm not completely terrified by it. There's a wonderful creative tool there, but
And I don't know that it's junior or senior. Like, I want to push back a little bit to say maybe it's the creative people that learned how to use the tool that are going to be the ones that ultimately.
There was also I did an interview with Violetta Jaguar, who did a piece called Prison X, but she's actually been liberated in terms of she's not a coder, and she's self-described as being on the spectrum, and so she has difficulty communicating, and so she's been using ChatGPT to actually and she speaks multiple languages, which for her says is actually a benefit when using these conversational interfaces. And so it's actually opened up these whole new vistas for her to be able to kind of push the next edge of what she's able to do in these augmented reality scenes and the art that she's creating that is kind of augmenting her. And she's not a senior level, but she's a junior level that's able to actually, previously she had to work with the whole team, but now she's able to kind of off-strap and be more self-sustaining in a way. So I feel like there's people who may not have access to some of the ways that they need to really focus their attention or kind of interface with the technology, and this is providing a new conversational interface with the technology that is even producing these code snippets that are kind of opening up these new ways. And obviously, a lot of the code that you produce doesn't always work, and you still have to kind of sometimes use ChatGPT to fix itself, or if you can't, then with like WebGPU, I did an interview with Brandon Jones, and this is a whole new kind of shader language called Wixel. It's the WebGPU shader language. There's no existing examples of this, which means that we need a lot of human labor to be able to produce that. So things like these large language models don't start to work until you have a corpus of human labor that is being built upon. So you always will need these humans, and if you get rid of all the humans and just have it kind of feed upon itself, it's just going to have this kind of feedback cycle where it's a garbage in, garbage out type of situation at some point. So I get a little afraid of, as we start into this new era where we've been scraping the internet to train these ChatGPT, now there's going to be all this ChatGPT nonsense and garbage and hallucinations that are out there, and it's going to be kind of like a and that's why Jan LeCun says this is going to be essentially, the large language models are doomed in that, from mathematically, he doesn't see that they have a lot of utility, but in terms of their hallucinations, he just doesn't see that it's going to be a viable solution, that you need to have other architectures to actually have these human levels of interaction. And so it's not that they obviously are surprisingly effective at what they do, but yet there's a lot of limitations that, from his perspective, are not going to be overcome. Yeah. So I think we have to understand what it can and cannot do, and as we navigate this, then we all kind of have this new level of media literacy when it comes to interfacing.
Although I have to say people are overstating the frequency of hallucinations and also the lack of control over it, because they actually have done fine-tuning systems where if you're, let's say, in the medical field, you can actually train your data on medical data, and that the level of hallucination goes way down. You can then also add in additional procedural-based checking to validate the data. So the level of hallucination isn't generic for everything everywhere. It can be tuned, and by combining it with cognitive systems or secondary systems, you can get pretty good content. Now, the other thing is hallucination may only be bad in certain use cases, but not necessarily in creative use cases. Right. So if you're writing a story, and whether it's you're having a Scoby or having a slime mold, it really
creating a new Fat Boy
it doesn't really
video.
matter, right?
Yeah.
They can get creative in things that we didn't even think about that could be super cool. So hallucination in that context could actually add creativity. Right? I don't know if I would say that it's a stochastic parrot type of a model today, because they've actually recently just came out about 2 weeks ago with some new tests on theory of mind, and ChatGPT or GPT-3 was about a grade 3 level, GPT 3.5 was around a 6th grade level in terms of theory of mind. And now with GPT-4, they're actually getting, they've gotten over 90% or 100%.
The problem, though, is that they don't disclose what their architecture is. They don't know what the training data is. And so there's no way to, and also tests are not a great way of assessing what intelligence is. So like all these things are not,
I'm not saying those
there's a lot
tests,
of problems with these assertions.
I'm not saying the tests are perfect, but what it is showing is that the level of theory of mind capabilities of these models are getting better and better, and in a very quick way. So I think to say that they will never be able to reach these certain levels is probably a little bit too conservative.
Do you think that we'll go to smaller data sets that are more reliable, perhaps? Like, let's say we took all voices of VR, data, and there was just a AI-based
they've actually done
that.
They've actually trained it on specific smaller sets, and essentially all the hallucination goes away.
Well, when I asked ChatGPT who I was, it gave me a lot of reasonably plausible information that was half of it was completely made up and wrong.
Because it was based on the entire internet, right? So if it did a training based on your interviews, I bet it would be a lot more accurate.
Well, I did actually, over this past couple of weeks, I used WhisperX, which is an offshoot of Whisper, and I went back and got transcripts for all 1,200 plus Voices of VR podcast episodes, and even with diarization. And so I've been starting to play with trying to actually get the transcripts. And once you have the transcripts, then it opens up new possibilities. But I do think there is this other aspect of, ownership and consent and who owns that data. And, it's sort of like as we go into these new realms, to what degree have people consented to using that data and a lot of data that's been stolen. So there's a lot of deeper ethical issues for how these data sets are even being trained. And so I'm sort of even cautious with even the archive that I've helped to curate, what happens to that and what people start to do that. There's a lot of exciting possibilities, but at the same time, it's like, what is this model of shared consent as we move forward for, whether or not people can opt in or opt out to being a parts of these data sets, which at this point.
We need to separate the data provenance and ethics versus the capabilities.
Why?
No, in terms of, they're two different
Why does it
discussions.
need to be? No, it's the same. I mean, it's a relational aspect. So,
but I'm saying that
it's fundamentally interconnected.
The capabilities of these products, of these systems, will get increasingly better. But it's up to us how we want to manage the provenance, or how we want to manage the rights of the data where it came from. But I'm saying you can't say because you're not sure whether this data came from the right place that the system will never get smart. I mean, those are completely two separate issues.
It's a utilitarian argument that you're making, that essentially the benefits for doing that, it doesn't matter what kind of harms you bring, because you don't have to be in relationship to those people. And I think that's just a wrong assertion.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that those are two different questions, and we don't. Just because the rights isn't properly managed today doesn't mean it won't be properly managed in the future. And just because the systems are not fully smart today doesn't mean it won't be fully smart in the future. So those are two separate questions, and with two separate ways of solving.
So I just one last thing I want to say is that I feel like these technologies, both virtual and augmented reality, are catalyzing us to have these fundamental paradigm shifts, both philosophically, ethically, and even from a level of substance metaphysics, where you have this object-oriented way of having this separation. And I think as we move into more of a relational ontology, we have to think about how these things are related to each other. We can't separate them. So that's why I'm disagreeing. Is that you have a different sort of metaphysical assumption there that is allowing you to make this like, you can sort of have these harms, and because you have this benefit that you found, it's okay to have those harms. But if you don't think about those relationalities from the very beginning, then how are you going to do that later? And that's my point, is that we have to, as we move forward, think about how we become into a right relationship to all of these technologies as we move forward. And as these things that you can just sort of like say, oh, we'll deal with that later, is just a type of way that you're, I don't know, it feels like you're out of relationship at that point.
Well, if we think about the internet, right? There was a lot of hope in the beginning that the internet would connect people, and it would get information to people that didn't have it, and all of those things were true. But there were a lot of things about the internet that we didn't realize back in late 90s, 2000 that did come true. So my hope is that as we're continuing to build this new computing paradigm, these new emerging technologies, as they're integrating with each other, that we can all go out, depending on whether we're consumers, users, builders, CEOs, that we can think about how are we using this technology, and hope that we are using it from a good place. We don't have a lot of time left, but everybody has interesting things to say, and you guys have all published really interesting pieces. Can you give a shout out to it, just a few things, for those that are on the Kent camp versus the Alvin camp in particular? You can. I've had a chance to listen to them, and can you just say just a few pieces that you?
Oh yeah. So I recently did a whole talk at San Jose State University where it was like a preliminary thoughts on AI, and so it's a talk on YouTube that I did. It's on my YouTube channel. And then Alvin and I had a conversation that I'd point folks to. And hopefully I'll relaunch some of Voices of AI at some point since it's coming back in. But yeah.
Yeah, and you were at Harvard recently.
Yeah, so I spoke at the Harvard XR conference about a month ago, and then also at the Athens Hellenic World XR conference as well about 2 weeks ago. And Louis Rosenberg and I are working on a book about AI and XR. So wait for that in about 6 months.
Yeah, and Tony, you're doing some really exciting things with Lamina One and other spaces. So
yeah, so Lamina One was founded by a novelist, and a lot of people on the executive team are creators in one form or another, like myself as a musician. And Neil's co-founder, Peter Vesson, is very, very keen on making sure that blockchain technology like Lamina One has is being used to help creators with provenance, to help people get paid out on large scale fairly, and technologies like that. So I'm very simpatico with that. That's why I work there. My personal writing these days has been a lot more creator-centric, about musicians in particular, because that's my passion. The real goal here for technologies like this, including AI, I think should be to enable that creativity, but make sure the people who contributed to it, which you started alluding to, can actually then get paid, or can opt out of this machine learning system if they don't want to be part of that machine. Nani De La Peña had suggested, maybe there needs to be a Creative Commons style licensing and attribution where people get to opt in, they get to say what level they want to participate in this machine. And so, that's where a lot of my writing's going these days, and my thought pieces are around how people can use these tools to create, but also participate in the future economy fairly. And again, our company is very much, looking at solutions like that.
Yeah, well, I want to thank every one of you for being on stage. There's a lot to discuss. I would love to continue to have this conversation over the years. It's going to continue to shift over the coming years. And thank you all for attending and listening to what's next in AI and the metaverse.